Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes.
When Clint Eastwood walked onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage, he wasn't just promoting a film, he was carrying decades of unfiltered American defiance. But what began as a casual interview spiraled into a live clash over freedom, truth, and the cost of silence. Maggie, his longtime aide, warned them don't push him. They didn't listen. And what happened next turned late-night television into a battleground. This wasn't just about a chair. It was about who still deserves a seat at the table. The green room was colder than it should have been. Not the air conditioning, it was something else. A quiet tension, like the stillness before a wildfire sweeps through dry brush. Clint Eastwood sat alone in a steel-backed chair, the kind too modern for a man who'd ridden through time on leather saddles and gunmetal resolve. In his weathered hands, a single sheet of paper, thin, white, and trembling slightly under his grip. 5 lines, typed in clean studio font topics to avoid politics, the 2012 RNC speech, gun control, civil rights protests, voting history. His thumb hovered over the last item, pressed gently against it like he was testing the edge of a blade. Maggie stood a few feet away, arms crossed, back rigid. She had been with him through 5 presidencies, 2 marriages, and the endless cycle of Hollywood reinvention. If anyone knew when Clint was about to snap, it was her. Her voice was low, firm, directed at the young producer in a headset who had wandered too close with a nervous smile. "Don't try to be cute," she said. "Don't cue a joke. Don't chase a viral moment. If you corner him, he won't play, and no script in this building will be able to fix it." The producer blinked, half laughed, then caught her eyes, and the laughter died in his throat. He nodded, retreated, and disappeared behind a curtain, like a child backing away from a growling dog. Maggie turned back toward Clint, who still hadn't spoken, just staring at the paper. His eyes weren't angry, not yet, but something in his jaw, the tension. The slow grind made her uneasy. From the hallway came the thump of studio band rehearsal. The bass line carried like a war drum, echoing off concrete and plaster. Maggie looked down at her watch. 7 minutes until call. Clint folded the note slowly, precisely, like it was something sacred or cursed, then slipped it into the inner pocket of his blazer. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "They're going to try something." It wasn't a question. Maggie stepped forward, lowering her voice. "Yes, they are." Clint nodded once. That was all. Across the hall, through a partially open door, a pair of producers argued in hushed voices. One was older, polished, the kind who wore suits even behind the scenes. The other younger, hoodie and sneakers, hair in calculated chaos. "We need something big," the young one said. "He's been a meme before." "Right, the chair thing. It's gold. Just a clip. A 30-second throwback. Trust me, it'll explode." The older one hesitated. "It's risky," he muttered. "He's unpredictable. That's what makes it work." The younger one grinned. Back in the green room, Clint rose, his motion slow, deliberate, like he was preparing for a duel, not a sit-down interview. Maggie handed him a small paper cup of black coffee. He took it, sipped once, then placed it untouched on the side table. She watched him adjust his collar, pull the blazer snug across his shoulders. The note still there, tucked over his heart like a warning label no one else could read. The stage manager appeared at the door, clipboard in hand, face tight with forced cheer. 2 minutes, Mr. Eastwood. You're up after the monologue." Clint gave no reply. He stepped past him without a word, boots echoing softly against the tile. Maggie followed, half a step behind. As they neared the stage entrance, the laughter from Jimmy's opening monologue bled through the curtain. Something about celebrity scandals. The audience roared on cue. Clint stopped. His eyes narrowed, his head tilted slightly toward the sound. He stood like that for a full 10 seconds. unmoving. Maggie recognized the stance, the pause before a storm, the breath before the gun is drawn. Behind them, the hallway emptied. Studio staff gave them wide berth. Everyone knew who he was, but more importantly, they knew what he could do when provoked. Maggie leaned in close. "Just talk about the film," she whispered. "If they poke, don't swing first." Clint looked at her, and for a moment, the faintest trace of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. Then it was gone. The stage manager raised a hand, counting down with fingers. 3, 2, 1. The curtain began to rise. The band kicked in with a brassy riff. Jimmy's voice echoed over the cheers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the legend himself." And Clint stepped forward into the light. Backstage, just beyond the curtain's edge, the studio swelled with noise and light. The crowd was still buzzing from Jimmy's monologue, laughter clinging to the rafters like static. The band held a note just long enough to signal the transition. All smooth, all planned. A show built on rails. But behind the precision timing and cue cards, in the dim hallway lined with cables and clipboards, a storm was brewing. Inside the control room, two producers stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the feed through tinted glass. The younger one, Nate, bounced slightly on his heels, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. His eyes flicked from screen to screen, hunting for energy, for angles, for the moment. "He's walking out right now," he said. "Look at the crowd. They're eating it up. You throw the chair bit in here. We've got instant gold." Beside him, the older producer, Reed, didn't move. His jaw flexed, the only visible sign of tension. Reed had seen careers implode over stunts like this. Viral was good until it blew back. "Don't do it," he said. "It's not even political," Nate argued. "It's nostalgic, iconic, one little clip, and we've got Twitter hooked for 2 days straight." Reed shot him a glance. "You think he sees it that way?" Nate smirked. "He's an actor. He'll play." Reed didn't reply. Instead, he leaned into the mic that fed the floor crew. Tight camera on Kimmel. "Do not cut to Eastwood without my call." Meanwhile, Maggie stood just off stage, hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes were fixed on Clint, who had taken his seat under the studio lights. She wasn't watching the host, or the crowd, or the chaos in the control room. She was watching his breathing, the way his hands rested not loose, not clenched, but ready. Like a man who'd walked into a poker game where he already smelled the bluff. Jimmy's voice danced through the studio. He was in his rhythm, playing to the crowd, switching between charm and jab with seasoned ease. The kind of host who made even discomfort sound like banter. And Clint gave him nothing. Not resistance. Not amusement. Just stillness. Behind the scenes, Nate moved to a separate monitor and tapped on a cue file labeled Eastwood RNC-12. The thumbnail froze on that infamous image Clint on stage, gesturing to an empty chair. A decade old, but still electric, still divisive. "This goes in at minute 4, Nate said, half to himself. "Set it up like a throwback." Jimmy jokes. Crowd laughs. We roll the clip. Boom. Viral. Reed stepped in front of the screen, blocking his view. "That's not the play," he said. "Why not?" "Because that chair's still hot. That was 10 years ago. And the country hasn't cooled off," Reed snapped. Nate laughed under his breath, not mocking, but dismissive. "Come on, man. He's been memed to death. You think he doesn't expect it? This is late night, not PBS." Reed didn't blink. "I think he's the kind of guy who remembers exactly who laughed and why." Back near the curtain, a production assistant leaned toward Maggie, whispering, "They're prepping the RNC clip." She didn't react right away, just blinked. Once. "Are they insane?" The assistant shrugged helplessly. "Orders came from up top. Ratings are down this week. They want a spike." Maggie turned her gaze back to Clint. He was answering a question now. Voice calm. Even something about the land in his new film. The ranch. The quiet fight over property rights. It was subtle. But Maggie caught the edge. He was already laying track. drawing the line between fiction and truth, between the character and himself. And they were about to cross it. Back in the control room, the director's voice cut through the feed. "Stand by on clip 3. Ready playback?" Reed clenched his fists. "Don't push it," he said quietly. Nate ignored him. He was too far gone, already imagining headlines. Eastwood returns to the chair. 10 years later. It writes itself. The stage manager whispered through his headset. "Host is ready to pivot." Reed reached for the comm. "Don't." Too late. Jimmy leaned forward, smile tight. "So, Clint, before we get too serious, let's take a quick walk down memory lane." Clint's eyes didn't shift. "A decade ago," Jimmy continued, "you gave a little impromptu speech at a certain national convention about a chair." The crowd chuckled, unsure if it was okay to laugh. Maggie whispered under her breath, "Don't do it. Don't you dare." Jimmy turned to the screen behind them. "Let's take a look." The studio lights dimmed for the clip, but the temperature didn't drop. It rose. And Clint didn't move a muscle. Not his face. Not his body. But something changed. A silence that wasn't scripted. A stillness that wasn't passive. Maggie could feel it in her chest. That room was about to detonate. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at Clint. And Clint was looking at Jimmy. The studio lights came back up with the flick of a cue, soft and golden, bathing the set in artificial warmth. The band's final chord faded into polite applause as Jimmy Kimmel turned toward his guest with a smile practiced enough to smooth marble. Sitting across from him, Clint Eastwood leaned back, spine straight, eyes steady. One boot just slightly forward like he was bracing for uneven terrain. "It's an honor to have you here," Jimmy said, his tone bright, a little reverent. "You've got a new film out. Tell us about it. Tell us what drew you back to the director's chair." Clint didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he tilted his head toward Jimmy, voice low and even. "I never left." The audience chuckled. A few clapped, unsure if it was a punchline. Jimmy grinned, nodding like he'd expected the reply. He leaned in, elbow on the desk. "The film's about a rancher. Right. A man protecting his land from a corporate takeover." Clint gave a small nod. "It's about standing your ground." Jimmy latched onto the phrase. "A metaphor for something bigger." Clint paused, then said, "No, just the ground." Another ripple of laughter from the crowd. Lighter this time. Jimmy smiled again, but the edges were tight. He pivoted, switching gears. "Now, this rancher, is he anything like you?" Clint shrugged. "He minds his own business. Until someone gives him a reason not to." That line landed. The crowd hummed with it. Maggie, watching from the wings, exhaled through her nose. She'd heard it in rehearsal, knew it was coming, still gave her chills. Jimmy tapped his pen against the desk. "There's a line in the trailer. Something about freedom not being free." Clint said nothing. "You've always had a thing for that kind of talk." Jimmy continued. "Freedom, justice, gunslingers. But I'm curious, how do you see that now, I mean? With everything going on these days." There it was. Clint's fingers tightened just slightly on the armrest. A pause stretched between them. The audience stilled, sensing the change in tone. "Freedom," Clint said, "isn't about what you carry. It's about knowing when you don't need to." Jimmy blinked. "So, you mean, guns aren't freedom," Clint continued. "The ability to not reach for one, that's the part nobody wants to talk about." A few murmurs from the audience. Someone clapped. Someone else hissed. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, shifting in his seat. He tried to play it off, keep things moving. "Let's switch gears for a second. You've been in this business for decades. Started with TV westerns, made your name with Dirty Harry. Did you ever imagine back then you'd still be making films at your age?" Clint looked at him, not smiling, not annoyed, just looking. "Did you ever imagine you'd still be asking questions that dodge the point?" The crowd tensed. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but it cut, deep. Jimmy laughed, a bit too quickly. "All right, I guess I walked into that one." He leaned back, regrouping, picked up a card from the desk and skimmed it like he needed a lifeline. Clint didn't look away. His posture hadn't shifted an inch. Maggie, from backstage, tilted her head, eyes narrowing. She could feel the subtle tremor in the air. The host trying to stay in control. The guest refusing to let him. Jimmy cleared his throat. I read somewhere that you still ride horses every morning. That true? Sometimes still carry a six-shooter. Clint didn't answer right away. Then, with zero inflection, he said, You watch too many movies. The audience laughed again. Nervous this time. Jimmy chuckled with them. But there was a flicker of something else behind his eyes. Irritation. Maybe. Or realization. All right, he said, just trying to give the fans what they want. Clint looked at the audience, then back at Jimmy. Jimmy raised his hands, deflecting. Hey, we love you. We just want to hear the stories. The good ones. The real ones. Then stop cutting the edges off them. The sentence dropped like a weight. It wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. Jimmy opened his mouth, then closed it again. Maggie shook her head gently in the shadows. Not because Clint had said too much, but because she knew he was just getting started. The laughter had thinned. Not vanished, but stretched brittle around the edges, like glass under pressure. Jimmy shuffled his cue cards with casual flair, but his fingers tapped the desk a beat too fast. Clint hadn't moved, still seated, still calm. But there was a stillness to him now that buzzed with something deeper. Not performance, not anger, just presence, heavy and unblinking. Jimmy tried again, his voice a shade too light. So, Clint, we've been talking about the new film grit. Land, justice, classic themes. But, that's not the first time you've spoken out about the state of things. A few people in the crowd chuckled preemptively, sensing where he was headed. I mean, come on. Who could forget the infamous chair speech? A low ripple of reaction, some laughter, some groans. Jimmy flashed a grin. You remember that one? Right, 2012, Republican National Convention. You walked on stage and gave a speech to... What was it again? The conscience of America. He laughed. A handful of audience members followed. But it didn't echo. It scattered. Clint looked at him. Then at the monitor as it flickered to life behind them. The screen cut to grainy footage. The now iconic image of Clint Eastwood, standing beside an empty chair, gesturing, improvising, firing off lines about invisible politicians and broken promises. It had been memed, mocked, dissected, debated. The younger audience might have only known it as a clip on YouTube, but for Clint, it was a scar, and for those who watched it live back then, it was something else entirely, a fracture line in the cultural bedrock. Jimmy gestured toward the screen. Let's take a look, shall we? The lights dimmed slightly. The clip rolled. The voice of a younger Clint rang through the speakers, rougher, looser, holding nothing back. In the shadows, Maggie tensed. She didn't need to look at Clint to know what was coming. When the clip ended, the lights brightened again. Jimmy was already leaning into the moment. So, tell us, who were you really talking to that night? His smile widened. The president? The voters? Or just a chair? The audience laughed, louder this time, relieved for a joke, grabbing for familiarity. Clint didn't laugh. He didn't blink. I was talking to a hole, he said softly. Jimmy blinked. Pardon? Clint leaned forward. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I was talking to the hollow space left behind when leadership stops listening. The room hushed. When politics becomes noise instead of action, Clint continued, when men shake hands on camera and stab backs behind closed doors, that chair wasn't empty by accident. It was empty by design. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some leaned forward. Others leaned away. Jimmy tried to steer. Yeah, but surely you knew it would stir things up, right? That it would be, I don't know, misinterpreted? Clint's eyes narrowed just slightly. People don't misinterpret silence. They fear it. Because silence makes them fill in the blanks themselves. The tension in the studio was a physical thing now. You could feel it clinging to the rigging, to the rafters. Jimmy glanced at the producer's booth, then back at Clint, still trying to wrest back the wheel. Come on, Clint. That night, a lot of folks thought you went off script, that maybe you lost the thread. Clint's voice cut through him like a blade made of calm. The thread was already lost. I just pointed to the hole it unraveled from. More murmurs, a few claps, a few audible dams. Jimmy's grin was fading now. He sat back, forced a laugh. Well, I guess we won't be rolling that clip again anytime soon. Clint didn't answer. You know, you're kind of proving the point, Jimmy said, trying to recover the room, that we can't even joke about a chair without starting a riot. Maybe it's just TV. Maybe it's not that deep. Clint looked out at the audience, scanning the rows, his voice low. That's the problem. You think because it's on a screen, it's safe. You think the lights make it less real. He turned back to Jimmy. But when people stop expecting anything from the chair, when they stop believing someone will ever sit in it and actually listen, that's when the country starts to rot. The crowd stilled. Not frozen breathing. Feeling. Processing. Maggie's hands were clenched at her sides, her jaw set. She knew this was no longer about a film, or a clip, or a host trying to get a laugh. This was a man dragging a symbol back into the light and showing the rot beneath the varnish. Jimmy exhaled sharply. Okay, Clint, you've made your point. Just a chair. No. Clint leaned in, voice firm now. Not just a chair, a mirror, and for a split second Jimmy Kimmel had nothing to say. The silence after Clint's words wasn't empty. It was loaded, taut as a wire stretched between two towers. In the studio, no one moved. The band didn't shuffle. The floor crew didn't breathe. Jimmy Kimmel sat a beat longer than usual, blinking like the lights had gotten brighter. Then, with a little shrug, he leaned forward, playing casual. All right, he said. So the chair was a mirror. Fair enough. But since we're already cracking the seal on uncomfortable truths, let's go one more round. He shifted in his seat, trying to smile but not quite finding it. You talk about leadership, about silence, about people being left out. But let me ask, when the country erupted in protest, when people filled the streets over George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of it, where were you? The crowd stirred. Maggie stiffened backstage. Jimmy continued, voice steady but edged now. You believe in freedom, right? In standing your ground. Why not stand with them? Why not say Black Lives Matter? Clint's eyes didn't narrow. His mouth didn't twist. He just looked at Jimmy like a man measuring the weight of a question that had been flung too lightly. Freedom, he said, isn't something you rent for a protest. You either own it or you don't. Jimmy opened his mouth, but Clint went on. You want to talk about standing up good? Let's talk about all the folks who marched, who chanted, who raised signs for cameras, and then turned off their conscience when the feed ended. A hush fell again. The audience was split already, feeling the edge coming. Jimmy tried to interject, but Clint's voice cut through, calm but razor sharp. You think freedom has a color? It doesn't. But hypocrisy sure as hell does. It comes dressed in whatever cause is trending that week, wrapped in slogans, sold in hashtags. The first wave of reaction hit gasps, a few cheers, a few boos, then the crowd fractured, splintering audibly. Clint didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, eyes burning steady. I'm not here to play sainthood with the left or martyrdom with the right. I've seen too many flags waved by men who never bled for anything real. Jimmy was still smiling, but it had turned brittle like a shell about to crack. So what, you don't support protest? I support people who live what they shout, who show up when the cameras leave. The rest. Noise. More applause, more protest. Someone in the back yelled something indecipherable. A woman near the front rose halfway from her seat, then sat down again, shaking her head. Maggie muttered under her breath. There's no commercial break big enough to clean this up. Jimmy adjusted his collar. But don't you think silence sometimes equals complicity? Clint nodded. Sometimes. But shouting empty words is complicity too. Just dressed prettier. The air was electric now. The audience a live wire. Clint wasn't raising his voice, but every sentence hit like a weight dropped from height. Jimmy tried to laugh. You sure know how to rile a crowd? Clint's answer came without pause. They're not riled. They're waking up. The floor producer was gesturing wildly at the booth. Cut. Go to break. But the cameras stayed hot. Someone upstairs was watching the numbers, and the numbers were climbing. Jimmy glanced again toward the crew. then back at Clint. So what would you have done? If not take a knee or hold a sign? What's the right way to stand up? Clint looked past him at the crowd. His voice dropped, just a touch. The right way. You live it. You vote like it matters. You work like it's your name on the laws. You teach your kids to see people, not colors. And you don't wait for a hashtag to care about justice. The room swelled with mixed reaction. Shouts, applause, murmurs all folding into each other like a rising tide. Jimmy shook his head, exhaled hard. You talk like the system's already broken. Clint's response was quiet. Not defeated. Just true. It was never whole. Maggie closed her eyes for a second. She'd seen Clint make speeches before. Rattle cages. But this wasn't about show. This was a man carving open the room with truth like a scalpel. And no one was safe from it. The room was shaking now. Not from motion, but from weight. The kind of weight that presses into your chest and makes your hands forget what to do. Jimmy sat still, half turned to the crowd, as if gauging whether they were with him or against him, whether this was salvageable or spiraling into something no producer could untangle. His fingers tapped once on the desk, then again. No rhythm, just noise. Clint didn't move, his shoulders square, posture like stone. He looked not at Jimmy but straight ahead, into the camera. The red light blinked live. That chair, he said quietly, wasn't for a president. It was for the people no one talks about once the confetti's swept up and the slogans rot in the sun. That chair's for the ones who work 2 jobs and still lose the house. For the vet who can't afford a therapist. For the mother whose kid didn't come home from school not because of grades, but bullets. The crowd, stunned seconds ago, now reacted in waves. A woman near the front stood up, hand over her mouth. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then louder, but not unified. Just as many were booing, some shouting him down, others shouting him up. The air cracked with division. No cue cards could hold this. Maggie watched from the wing, face pale, jaw clenched. She saw Jimmy glance toward the control booth again, this time for help. The floor manager stood frozen, headset askew, whispering orders no one was following. Clint kept going, voice calm but steel-wired. You want to know who I was talking to that night? The empty chair. I was talking to a ghost. 1 million ghosts. Americans who vanished from the political conversation because they didn't fit the headline. Not loud enough. Not photogenic. Not useful. He leaned in slightly, eyes never leaving the lens. And they're still gone. Still not seen. Because both sides would rather scream at each other than sit down and listen to the people they're pretending to fight for. The crowd burst again, some on their feet clapping, others pointing fingers, shouting over the noise. The band wasn't playing. The lights hadn't dimmed. There was no commercial, no break, no edit to soften this moment. Jimmy sat with his hands flat on the desk, lips pressed thin. His show, his name on the wall, his turf, and none of it belonged to him anymore. Maggie took one step forward, just one, enough to be seen by Clint, to signal him time to go. But he raised his hand, a simple gesture, not angry, not dramatic, just final. Not yet. Then he stood, slowly. The audience fell half silent, like someone had cut the volume but left the static. Clint turned, not to Jimmy, not to Maggie, but back to the camera. His voice dropped lower, but somehow grew louder. That chair's not empty anymore. The words landed like stone on steel. The kind of sentence that doesn't need explanation, just echo. He held the moment. Let it settle. Let it sting. Maggie exhaled through her nose. She didn't smile. But there was something in her eyes, something between pride and heartbreak. She had warned them, not because Clint was unpredictable, but because he was exact. Behind her, a junior producer fumbled with his tablet, trying to cue a bumper. Someone else yelled about ads, about the sponsor window closing. No one was listening. Jimmy finally stood, not to regain control, just because sitting felt wrong now. He looked at Clint, then the audience, then back to the chair beside his desk, and for the first time that night, He had nothing to say. Clint nodded once, turned, and walked off stage. The crowd roared, part applause, part protest, all of it real. Outside. The night air was cooler than expected, the kind of cold that settled beneath the skin without asking permission. Clint Eastwood stepped out of the side door of the studio, the echo of the crowd still rattling through the concrete walls behind him. He didn't look back, didn't speak, just walked slowly, hands at his sides. Each step measured like a man used to gravel underfoot in silence after fire. Maggie followed close behind, her heels clicking once with each of his two. She didn't rush, didn't try to fill the space. He'd spoken enough for one night, maybe for a decade. Behind them, the lights of the studio pulsed and flickered. Inside, chaos reigned, producers shouting into headsets, PR teams drafting statements before the outro music had even started. The next guest canceled, the next segment scrapped. Social media was already 10 steps ahead, on Twitter. The clip of Clint walking off stage was up within 90 seconds. No edits. No filters. Just that wide shot him leaving the chair. The crowd split behind him like a broken tide. By the 5-minute mark, the hashtags had started. Clint was right. Eastwood eruption. Chair no longer empty. The views climbed in real time. Millions by midnight. Cable news split fast. One conservative anchor called it the most disrespectful moment in live television history. He branded Clint a relic, a has-been chasing relevance with theatrics. A left-leaning commentator disagreed, called it dangerous in another way, said giving someone like Clint Eastwood a live mic in 2025 was like handing a match to a dry field. But in between, somewhere deeper, a quiet voice on an independent podcast whispered that it might have been the most honest 5 minutes on television in 10 years, a moment where someone finally said the quiet part out loud and refused to smile after. Maggie caught up to Clint as they neared the black SUV waiting at the curb. She didn't touch his arm, just walked beside him. "You always know, don't you?" she said. "How to make the room go silent. Not by yelling, just by telling the truth." He didn't answer, but she hadn't expected him to. Behind them, the banner stretched across the side of the building fluttered once, caught in a sharp gust. The corner ripped free. A glossy image of Jimmy's face bent back on itself. The word "live" tore straight down the middle, flapping like a wound left open too long. Maggie turned to look. Clint didn't. He paused at the edge of the sidewalk, looked up at the night sky. Somewhere far above, a helicopter pulsed red light against the clouds. Below, the city buzzed on horns, engines, the hum of a country too busy to breathe. Clint exhaled. Back inside. The show limped to a close. Jimmy sat back at his desk, voice flat, trying to joke his way through the closing lines. The laughter from the crowd came delayed, unsure, like muscle memory without conviction. The music played them out. Too loud, too bright. A fireworks display at a funeral, but none of it could compete with the image already burned into screens across the country, a man walking away from the spotlight like he never needed it, and never would again. Clint opened the door to the SUV. Maggie slid in beside him. No words, just the faint creak of leather seats and the slam of a door shutting the noise of the world out. As the car pulled away, the camera phones kept rolling, but Clint didn't wave, didn't nod, just stared ahead,